Dr. Marshner was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1943 and raised in the Lutheran Church. He attended Baltimore City College, which despite the name is a high school, college prep school, where, as Bill related in the acknowledgments to his anti-modernist anthology, quote, "They gave me the French, the German, and the Latin that I have been using ever since, daily and avidly," end quote. So for those of you struggling to learn just 2 years of a foreign language here, notice the generational gap. Already had French, German, and Latin entering college. He then pursued his undergraduate studies at Gettysburg College as a pre-ministerial student, so intending on seminary, majoring in Greek. His interest in Old Testament studies led him to postpone entry into seminary and instead to pursue a graduate degree at Yale. There he studied Akkadian, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Ugaritic with the intention of fighting the rationalist conclusions of the then dominant historical critical exegetical school. Always interested in both politics and theology, at Yale, Bill also joined the most conservative political and philosophical debate society of the Yale Political Union, namely the Party of the Right, and later became its chairman. It was through association with that group that I found out about Bill coming down here to found Christendom College. Little did I know that 25 years later I would come here myself. So thank you, Bill, for inspiring a generation of Yale students as well. At Yale, he recounts that he encountered a deeper problem. As he puts it, thinking about the exegetical method of Christ and his apostles forced him to turn to deeper philosophical and theological questions. His reading in the Church Fathers and in St. Thomas Aquinas convinced him that Lutheranism did not represent early Christianity, and so in 1967, he was received into the Catholic Church. He began to write for Triumph magazine, which, if you don't know, is an important precursor to the foundation of Christendom College. He served as its assistant editor there from 1971 to 1973. He also wrote for the Wanderer newspaper and was its Washington editor from 1972 to 1975. In 1973, he married the charming Irish lass, an indefatigable conservative political activist, Connie Coyne. Where is Connie? There she is. They celebrated just recently, about 18 months ago, their 50th wedding anniversary. So thank you, Connie, for all that you've done for Bill and for this college. Together they have 5 children, 4 living and 1 in heaven. Bill returned to graduate study in 1975, earning his MA in theology from the University of Dallas, and then in later years earning his licentiate and then his doctorate in sacred theology from the Lateran University in Rome. His doctoral thesis is entitled Natural Desire and Natural End, a critical comparison of Cajetan, Soto, and Banez. In 1977, Dr. Marshner founded Christendom College, where he served as professor of theology for nearly 40 years. His classes in moral theology and apologetics were staples of every graduating Christendom class for decades. He designed and he taught the majority of classes that are still offered by our theology major today. He gave both to the Christendom core in general and our theology major in particular its fundamentally Thomistic character. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add that many generations of Christendom students fondly remember Bill's evening to Bacchanalia, where he would come out of his office with a box of cigars or a jar of tobacco to share, and maybe on a feast day some fine whiskey, and sit in the Madonna quad and talk to students for hours about politics or philosophy or theology. And that was a fond memory for so many generations of Christendom students. So for so much of what we have here at Christendom Culture, 48 years now since its founding, we owe Dr. Marshner our profound thanks. As if founding a college and running it, while getting one's doctoral thesis completed wasn't enough, Bill was also continuously active in politics during that entire time. So I can't do a full justice summary of it here, but during the Reagan era, he helped to form the Moral Majority and the Religious Roundtable, which were two deeply influential conservative groups. He later served as a senior scholar with the Free Congress Research and Education Foundation. He was a speechwriter for Senator Trent Lott, always a champion of the pro-life cause. From the early 1990s, he was editor of HLI Reports for Human Life International. He became a Knight of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre in 1997. From the 1970s till today, Dr. Marshner has written hundreds of articles, both theological and political. And so on the occasion of his retirement from teaching, the college honored him with the creation of the Marshner Collected Works Online website. I printed out and put around you a screenshot of the front page of it and the web address, marshner.christendom.edu. And there we've digitized over 100 of his articles, and there are also dozens of full-length audio of lectures that he has given from the 1980s through the 2000s. So I encourage you, if you want to get a sense of all of Bill's contributions, to go and explore that website, and I express my thanks to the college for its generous funding of the creation of it. I would also like to thank in a special way the Vice Presidents for Academic Affairs, both previous Dr. Townsend and current Dr. Tracy, in continuing to support Bill's scholarship by providing for him student workers all the way down to this day, which help him produce things like the book we're here to celebrate. So, since his retirement, Dr. Marshner has continued to publish. There are many books I'm going to pass over, but I just wanted to talk about his most recent. In 2016, he published Defending the Faith, an Anti-Modernist Anthology with CUA Press. And in 2019, Pre-Modern Philosophy Defended, which is a translation of some important works by the theologian Joseph Pointkin, which leads us up to the monumental work that we are here to celebrate today, that he has been working on for decades. So ladies and gentlemen, let us give a warm welcome back home to our own Dr. William Marshner. Now, here to actually tell us more about the work, I wanted to thank him, especially from coming all this way out here, is Mr. John Martino, who is the executive editor of Catholic University of America Press. And Mr. Martino is going to comment on why they wanted to publish this and its scholarly significance and impact, because it really is a monumental work. Just to briefly introduce Mr. Martino at much shorter length, Mr. Martino graduated from Williams College in Massachusetts before serving 3 years in Focus, Fellowship of Catholic University Students, great organization. He holds a master's degree in historical and systematic theology from the Catholic University of America, where he also took doctoral courses in moral theology. He's done editorial work for some important places: the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Sage Publications, Word on Fire, and several dioceses. As CUA Press editor, he initiated a number of book series, including Verbum Domini, Patristic Theology, Eastern Catholic Studies and Texts, and Early Modern Catholic Sources. Let's extend a warm Christendom welcome to Mr. Martino.
Okay, thank you. This is no ordinary book. We do about 60 a year. And I thought that when I was invited to speak, I would put it in some of the context of some of our regular books. I mean, here's one. Let's see, here's another one. Now, since it's 3 volumes, this is just the first, no one volume is probably our largest book we've ever published, but if you think of it as essentially one book, I mean, it's about 1,800 pages. The pagination is continuous. So we sold more of the first volume. I'm imagining that people are sort of trying it out with just one of these, and then maybe they will go on to the other 2. But you only get the index in the 3rd volume. I can't really, I'm not here. So it's a pretty monumental work, just physically. And this is part of the reason you see the difference in like the trim size, how big it is that this is 8.5 by 11, which is like a letter size, which is typically what you get in Microsoft Word, and as you print out on your computer. But then we usually put it through another program and make it smaller, and the pagination changes, etc. Well, when I started to look through this, and all of the little notes in the margins, and all of the columns, and all of the complicated things that Dr. Marshner did to help the reader, I realized this is going to be a nightmare to start over, redo it. We're just going to pick up those files. So of course, that should be just as easy, right, as just like pressing print on your computer. But it surely wasn't, as Mrs. Marshner knows. And so there was still a lot to do. I think the last thing that one of my colleagues noticed was, usually when you flip through a book, like here's the page numbers, they're kind of small, but the page numbers are on the same level, right? Like you flip through, and we realized that these at the last stage were sort of doing this as you flip through. And so my colleague was like, do I have to fix that? And I said, well, people are going to be reading this book probably for 50 years. Like, there's going to be people who are super interested and excited and always coming back to this. So if we can, we should do it. And so he went through every single page. And, again, we weren't using the fancy software we usually use. We were using Word and PDFs. But it worked out. So I hope that we caught all of the little issues, but never in publishing do you catch everything. But there weren't too many, but in 1,800 pages, there were some. But in terms of the broader context of Catholic theology and what we're trying to do at CUA Press, I wanted to put this next to a couple of these books in that sense. One of those contexts is what we call a Thomistic ressourcement. So I don't know how familiar you are with this term. This is one of the books in our series, Thomistic ressourcement. Thomistic ressourcement combines two things that were supposedly at odds with each other, which is clearly not really the case, as Dr. Marshner's career shows. When the ressourcement movement started to bring back to read patristic sources in their original context, to read scripture, it was set against neo-scholasticism. It was set against Thomism. And they said, well, let's get rid of Thomism and replace it with this other thing. And then some of the Thomists said, wait. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. We can get rid of Thomism, but we'll keep Thomas. We'll read him in his original context. And so Thomism sort of got a restart in some senses by, through this historical method. But a lot of people are nervous about the Thomists who follow Thomas. So for this book in particular, Analogy After Aquinas, is in our Thomistic ressourcement series. And it picks up, it goes into Cajetan, and it goes into various commentators on Thomas Aquinas, who looked at the concept of analogy and tried to make sense of what Thomas had said and solve some problems they saw, and so forth. So I proposed this to a journal to say that does Thomistic things, and said, hey, you all should review this. This is really smart. This is really good. And they said, but it says after Aquinas. We don't do after Aquinas. We do Aquinas, and maybe before Aquinas. I think because they were afraid that they'd be looked at the wrong way if they started doing things on Cajetan, etc. But we don't have that same restriction at CUA Press. This is in the Thomistic ressourcement series, even though it's primarily Thomas after Aquinas. But there's a larger problem that people can't read theology between, say, 1400, 1450, and 1800. I mean, certainly in my own graduate education, we basically didn't cover that period, except, say, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila. But everything else was not available in translation, which is why it's such a gift to have Cajetan's commentary, which is such an important milestone in Thomistic scholarship. available to those of us who, unlike Dr. Marshner, didn't learn all those languages and need to read it in English, at least for ease of reading, if not just for lack of Latin, period. So this is a standalone, the 3 volumes of this are standalone, but we do have a series, Early Modern Catholic Sources, this is one of the latest ones, where we're trying to bring a lot of these things back into English. And this book didn't end up in that series in part because the first name on here is not Cajetan, Thomas Divio Cajetan, it's not even William Marshner, it's Thomas Aquinas. Like, so this is a new translation of Aquinas' Prima Pars as well as Cajetan's commentary. So it doesn't quite fit the early modern box. But it definitely is one of the biggest, not just physically, but most important things that we've done to make that period of theology accessible. The other context I just wanted to touch on is the connection to analytic philosophy. So I was just looking at a book, I was glancing at a book that was just come out in German on Catholic theology in the 20th century in the US, or at least after 1945. And I don't think they didn't mention too many conservative thinkers, so Dr. Marshner I don't think got a mention, unfortunately. But one of the things they said was, one of the strange things about Catholic theology in the United States is that it very seldom refers to the analytic tradition in philosophy. And I'm not going to try to explain what that is. I know there's usually a lot of symbols and things, which was one of the issues in this book, is that some of the symbols when we moved files, turned into gobbledygook. So there were all these question marks where there were supposed to be asterisks and different things. And so, it's something that some philosophers have taken up, but a lot of theologians just kind of ignore what the dominant philosophy is in modern, in contemporary U.S., philosophy departments. And he was saying this is a real opportunity for growth in theology, and that's something Dr. Marshner I think is doing in this book. If you look at the footnotes, I mean, others can tell you more about what's actually going on. But if you look at the footnotes, he's aware of that tradition, and he's showing how Cajetan is actually much more relevant than people think to those kind of discussions. So that's a little side benefit in addition to actually getting, getting the original text in a really good translation. So I mean, I just wanted to conclude my time up here as saying that these things, both translating this and the early modern project more generally, are a work that's going to take generations. This is the patristic resource model, something that's been going on for more than 100 years, and the Thomistic resource model has been going on for decades. This is not just this is a landmark on the way to something much bigger. And I would talk to Dr. Marshner before myself, but maybe talk to a publisher at some point. If you're someone in this room wants to be the one to get the Secunda Pars and the Tertia Pars into these, into more volumes, or if you're just interested in going on to further study to look at the early moderns and not only the medieval is great and there's plenty of work to do there. But this is another example of a dissertation we have at that became a book in the Thomistic resource model that looks at the Salmantenses in the 16th century. So there's a real opportunity to do a lot of work in this area. But yeah, what Dr. Marshner has done is a really great start to that and a really landmark achievement of that. And so thank you for bringing it to us.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Next, I'd like to invite here to speak our own Dr. Stephen Hipp of the Notre Dame Graduate School to tell us more about the significance of those volumes. Dr. Hipp.
Jaslowski, it's an amazing legacy we're here to celebrate this evening. I've been asked to say a few remarks about the significance of Dr. Marshner's contribution to this commentary. Let me just begin by saying I'm very honored to have been asked to offer a few comments on this occasion. Regrettably, I have to leave immediately afterwards because I have a class that starts at 5 o'clock. So, but the work we're celebrating today represents really a tremendous contribution to the field and to students in philosophy and theology. Cajetan's monumental commentary is now readily accessible. And not only for those who aren't proficient in Latin, but also for those who are, in fact, accustomed to working in Latin. Thanks to this publication, being able to dive into Cajetan's commentary in English has already given me the opportunity to refresh my familiarity with Cajetan's thinking and to revisit some of his profoundly insightful perspectives. So aside from his prominent role in controversies over ecclesial authority and his formidable defense of the church at the time of the Reformation, the history of philosophy and theology has been permanently transformed by the pioneering thought of Cajetan in important domains. You started to hear a little bit about one of those domains that I have in mind. In particular, I'm thinking of his theory of personal subsistence and his contribution to the doctrine of analogy. In each of these regards, and in others as well, the Cardinal not only expounds the mind of Thomas Aquinas, but he provides creative, coherent, and philosophically rigorous resoluciones that advance the status questionis. If criticized by some Thomists, in particular 16th century Thomists of the Parisian Sorbonne, for departing too far from Aquinas' thought, as one of the greatest speculative theologians of last century put it, quote, Cajetinian Thomism is exemplary, standing far apart from dime a dozen naive Thomism, which frames all of its answers with Thomas says, telling us nothing more than what Thomas said. So Cajetan's writings, including his commentary on Thomas, like the man himself, exhibit an independence of thought that is meticulously faithful to tradition, at the same time that they fearlessly confront the issues of his day. And this is what Dr. Marshner has made accessible to us, fulfilling, I might add, the intentions of Pope Leo XIII, who had ordered that Cajetan's commentary be included in the critical Leonine edition of the Summa he prepared in the 19th century. In addition to these merits, the present publication is monumental in its own right for Dr. Marshner's extensive footnotes. This is, for me, in fact, which is a great discovery as I've been browsing through it. Delighted to mention that I've already acquired all 3 volumes of commentary, Prima Pars. But his detailed comments help us not only to clarify Cajetan, but in highly original ways, they illuminate the subject matter by relating it to contemporary scientific theory. This is what really stood out to me, is the kind of interdisciplinary agility that Dr. Marshner is just displaying on every page of the commentary. But not just contemporary scientific theory, but also to linguistic and logical perspectives that are proper to analytic philosophy. This is especially uncommon among Thomists, and it has the exceptional value of broadening the analogical horizon within which we can interpret the angelic doctrine. Further, and equally exceptional for an edition of the Summa, Dr. Marshner shares with the reader keen insight into medieval cosmology. And this is of tremendous help in understanding the context in which Aquinas deals with a number of questions. For example, the distinction among beings in the universe, or the number of angels, and other important topics. So personally, again, this is another aspect of this translation that I'm eager to benefit from and to learn from as a Thomist as well. So I am deeply grateful for Dr. Marshner's work, and I'm delighted to have it on my shelf And I'm just grateful for the legacy that you are here at Christendom College, and I'm proud to be part of. So congratulations.
Thank you, Stephen. Doug's going to see if he can flip on the podium, but I'm going to project. So next up, before we get to our Quodlibet, I would like to introduce the Dean of our graduate school. Oh, look at that. That's a little bit better. Dr. R.J. Matava. Dr. Matava.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Janiszewski and Dr. Marshner, for your work. It's a great joy and an honor to be here with you today to celebrate what is really an achievement of historical proportions with the publication of Dr. Marshner's volumes. When I was asked by Dr. Sakanikas to say a few words today, after saying yes, I think the next thing I said was, but just 5 minutes. How do you say in just 5 minutes? How do you communicate the importance of what Dr. Marshner has done? The achievement being celebrated today represents some 3 decades, 30 years of constant and consistent work by Dr. Marshner, and no doubt with the support of his family very much in the background every step of the way. Everybody in this room realizes, and as we heard from Dr. Janiszewski, Dr. Marshner dedicated his career to teaching over more than 4 decades. So most of his achievements are in flesh and blood. They're in souls transformed by a classroom encounter. And that reality makes his accomplishment all the more remarkable. Practically all of his spare time over the last 3 decades has been channeled into this project. Time that others would have spent going on vacation or doing other projects or pursuing hobbies, he has dedicated all of that in a real sacrificial gift of self to this project, but really more to the point, to the church and to us by providing us with this work. Dr. Hipp gave us some really illuminating perspective on who Cajetan was, so I won't say too much about that, but Thomas de Vio Cajetan, 1469 to 1534, is widely regarded as the finest, certainly one of the finest commentators on the works of St. Thomas. It's amazing that he was able to compile his commentary in as few years as he did, but still that work in itself was a monumental achievement. Thomas de Vio Cajetan was a scholar and a pastor, he was a bishop, of immense stature, and his significance was recognized even in his day. Among his many achievements, besides his academic achievements, he was also called into the fray in the schism of the church over Luther's teaching. He was called to intervene with Luther. He was teaching at the University of Padua. He engaged with the Averroists at the University of Padua in that day. So he had a very important role in the life of the church and in the history of Christian thought in the 16th century. His significance was so great that, as Professor Hipp pointed out, Pope Leo XIII, with his encyclical Aeterni Patris of 1879, called for the establishment of the Leonine Commission. I'm sure many of you have heard of the work of the Leonine Commission. Its task was to prepare a critical edition of the works of St. Thomas Aquinas. And Pope Leo XIII recognized Cajetan's significance so much that he insisted that his commentary, along with that of Sylvester of Ferrara, be published along with the text of St. Thomas. Now, to give you some perspective on the scope of that work, this was again in 1879 that the Leonine Commission was initiated. To this day, I believe the job is about half done. The job is preparing a critical edition of Aquinas' works. I remember seeing the offices of the Leonine Commission while a graduate student at the Dominican House of Studies down in Washington, D.C., and that now is a while ago. But that work is still underway. Another thing worth noting is this, that still today, there's a great deal of St. Thomas's work not yet translated into English. That may be surprising because if you're mainly engaging just with the Summa Contra Gentiles or the Summa Theologiae or even in recent years, there have been translations of other significant works. It remains the case that there is a lot of material not yet translated into English. And until relatively recently, that wasn't too much of a problem because everybody learned Latin, right? All the priests were trained in Latin. Even as we saw earlier, kids in public schools and private schools at the secondary level were trained in classical languages. So this has become a real barrier to us. And we tend to be the inheritor of a story, like John pointed out earlier, about what happens in the history of scholasticism. But few of us are even equipped to begin to unravel the threads of that story ourselves. And so that's actually a very risky position to be in because there's a lot of wisdom that we can actually miss out on without being able to go back to the text. So it's really a great service of charity that Professor Marshner has dedicated so much time to this work in order to facilitate that for us and indeed to make it possible for those that can't go back to the original text. So it's really a whole new window into St. Thomas, as well as a window into the later scholastic tradition that followed upon the works of St. Thomas. A couple of comments about particulars in Professor Marshner's work. He began this project while contemplating the Trinity, contemplating the question of procession in God, which we see covered in the Prima Pars, question 27, Article 1. That's a difficult matter. So Professor Marshner turned to one of the greatest of commentators, to Cajetan, for guidance on this matter. And it's when he encountered Cajetan there for the first time on the Trinity that his mind was open to the vast and deep dialogue that takes place in the centuries following St. Thomas Aquinas. And I think this is still a dark area for many of us today, but it's extraordinary, the amount of work that is out there, and almost none of it is translated. This work is of profound significance. It's amazing how much thought and effort the thinkers of the 16th century and actually the centuries before and after put into these questions. We can learn a great deal from them. And that's what Professor Marshner's mind was opened up to as he read Cajetan. He saw the vast and deep dialogue among the medieval and early modern doctors on the Trinity, but on a whole wide range of topics. And through Cajetan's work, Dr. Marshner stepped through time, entered into that conversation. And so his translation now enables us to do the same with greater facility. Professor Marshner has mentioned to me certain other highly recommendable passages in the commentary, and if you can get a copy, you'll want to look certainly at these texts. Two in particular. One is question 14, Article 13 of the Prima Pars. If anyone here is familiar with that, that is a notoriously difficult text about God's knowledge of future contingent things. That happens to be a topic that I've spent a lot of time on too, so I was really pleased to hear that that you found that illuminating in Cajetan. I spent about 15 years on that topic and matters related to it. And Cajetan was very illuminating for Professor Marshner on that topic of God's foreknowledge of future contingents and the related questions about divine causality, human free will, grace, predestination, and related matters. Another text which really stands out as unparalleled in Professor Marshner's estimation is the commentary on question 76, Article 1. Professor Hipp alluded to this matter in his introduction. This concerns the union of soul and body. And Professor Marshner says, this is a commentary that is beyond praise, right? So great is its quality. There, Cajetan treats of how the soul, the human soul, is at once the subsistent form of the body, as at once the form of the body and at the same time a subsistent spiritual reality in itself. In closing, I just want to acknowledge that Bill's work is an achievement of absolutely historical proportions. It's an extraordinary service to the church. And I just want everybody who encounters his work, everybody here today really, to understand and appreciate the extraordinary sacrifice that his work represents. Even more importantly, though, than the sacrifice, the value of the work. I think there are many who could look at this work, see that not only is the book larger, but also the type is smaller. So my question, John, is not how many pages is it, but what is the word count with the footnotes? I mean, it's just an immense work. I think anybody who looks at that could see the extraordinary sacrifice that goes into it, but I really want everybody here to appreciate the value of that sacrifice. There are many people that might look at that and say, that's crazy, I would never do that. But there is an extraordinary value to this work. Truth can be expensive. The opportunity cost for pursuing it can be very high. Often it is. But no sum can balance its worth. For to encounter truth is in a way to encounter God himself, who is the first truth. Professor Marshner, thank you very much for your work.
Thank you very much, RJ. That brings us to the main event for this evening. But before that, just a couple of things to announce to everyone. So as most of you probably know, we are giving away 3 volume sets of Dr. Marshner's commentary. You'll see there's an example over there by the basket. So if you want to sign up for that raffle, please put your name in the basket. We will draw it after the Quodlibet. At the end, you must be here in order to receive your volume. And then if you have one copy or your own copy and you'd like Dr. Marshner to sign that or anything else, he's also available after the Quodlibet for that. To join us for the Quodlibet, I would like to invite Dr. Joe Arias, also of our graduate school, to come up here and to participate with the Quodlibet with Bill. We're going to invite the whole audience. If you want to talk about anything from the Prima Pars, put your hand up. We've got a couple of microphones here to circulate amongst the audience. I'm going to do my best to avoid feedback and not frustrate our cameraman or the mic system. But Joe, come on up, and RJ as well. Okay. And I'll pass around the mic, but don't be shy. And it's just an open set of questions on anything people might want to ask about on the Prima Pars.
I should say too, if we need the
take
text.
You take one, I'll take the other. Yeah.
If we need the text, if somebody wants to grab it, it's on my bike outside. We can.
You haven't memorized it yet?
I know.
All right, so thank you to our panelists, and the floor is open. It's always slow to get going. People don't know if they want to be the first to ask. It's all right.
I'm surprised that you're not looking for vengeance. I've been treated to over an hour of speeches about my work. And I have not gotten the opportunity to say anything.
Please, go right ahead.
Silence is golden when it contributes to our getting out.
Spoken like a veteran professor. Here's a question.
Dr. Marshner, I was wondering what initially inspired you to start this project?
Okay, well, I knew about Cajetan's existence and written big commentary and so on, but I never read any of it. The people who browse Cajetan in Latin are few and far between. His prose is not easy. In fact, his terseness is often telegraphic. So it's difficult. Yeah. But I had a question that came to my mind when I discovered the medieval debate about procession of God. I thought, everybody knew about that. What's the question? Well, gee whiz. There were medieval theologians who denied that there were any processions in the divine being. Yes. They had other explanations for the Trinity of person, but it didn't start with procession. And there were those who had 3 and 4 and 5 and an infinite number of processions, and they all needed to be answered. And my hero, the late Cardinal from Cajetan, handled all those matters superbly and brought to my attention a controversy I didn't even know had existed. So I said to myself, I'm not going to teach again without this stuff. So I took it in a hand to translate it. What can I tell you? Further questions?
Okay, hi. Hey, so I assume the book took like way longer than a normal senior thesis. How long did it take you to write this book? Yeah.
It's not a fair question because, 25 years, something like that, 30 years. But part of the problem was that I didn't have time to devote to it continuously. I was carrying a full course load. And in the days of predecessor of the current president of this college, those course loads were heavy indeed. We thought teaching was that we should all be doing. We should be in the classroom. Never mind. I'm kidding. Anyway, what else?
What answers did you find in Cajetan that you think were the most formative for your own personal knowledge?
Okay. Mr. Matava mentioned my attraction to question 76, Article 1, which is about the union of soul and body. And my attention was riveted to it by the fact that here you get a complete discussion of forms versus subsistent things. And what counts as existence for form. Well, it isn't what you think. I don't know. Because it's second order existence, if I may say so. I think I'm the first one to say this in any detail. Most people are aware of first order logic. Okay? We have individuals and we have relationships between them. They have properties and so on. That's first order logic. Second order logic goes into every category and talks about the items in that category. So all the species would be mentioned and discussed in second order logic. Relations would be individuated and discussed in second order logic. So, wow, that was a blow my mind sort of moment. So I fastened upon that with all my Anything else?
I've recently taken an interest in the resource movement in the mid-1900s. There was a certain skepticism about some of the Thomistic studies in that movement, and it was hugely influential in Vatican II and it.
Yeah.
To what degree was their skepticism justified, and where might you take issue with that skepticism?
Well, I'm not going to come down flat-footedly for or against. There was plenty of room for researching Aquinas' relation to his sources and the historical appearance of his predecessor's work in his successor work. Plenty of room for that. There's plenty of room for resource money. But what troubles me about it is the hint of historicism. If you're not exploring the unfolding of ideas in time, you're not exploring anything, says the historicist. And I think otherwise, very much otherwise. But that's selected for another time.
What is the best way to understand the relation between a person's body and a transplanted organ?
Relation between a person's body and
An organ transplant that they received.
uh, well, organs are body parts. They're there because of a function. If you have another body part that will do the function, you're welcome to plug it in. And I don't think that there's a problem about personal identity with any of that, because identity is conferred by the soul wherewith you subsist. And there's no surgery for that.
There is an interesting question though about that, and I don't know the answer. I haven't thought about this at all before, but I think there is a question about like what is a kidney? You know, like what is an organ? Is it part of a whole? Once it's separated from the whole, what is its form apart from the soul? In what sense is it alive? You know, obviously tissues to be transplanted, we have to say, are alive, but you know, detached from the subject of whose they were. What makes a tissue to be alive, and then planted into a different organism with its own soul? I mean, that's what your question's getting at. I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but it raises a number of interesting issues about forms and the soul as a subsistent form, and you know, what exactly is the form of an organ? I think this question relates to the questions about you know, homininity and Aristotle about a body. You know, is a corpse a man in any meaningful sense, or just by way of a hominin? So I can see where this question is going, but I would need to think more. I don't know if that triggers any thoughts.
I'm on the hominin side. You will find this elaborately discussed in the Prima Pars, in the questions on man and on his physical makeup. Lots of stuff about that. That is where Aquinas spends most of his time writing about wholes and parts. He's not interested in received parts, pure parts.
So, is there a difference between a person being alive as a whole, on the one hand, and then the person's organs perhaps being alive as organs or as living tissues?
Sure. If you're talking about organ transplants, the organ has to be transplanted in a living state. It cannot have died in the interim, right? And so...
That does raise interesting questions because we don't kill people for their organs, right? We want to make sure that that they're dead, so that the subsistent. I mean, maybe we do that. I mean, it may in fact happen all the time. I mean, that's the ethical question. But you know, in principle, right? When somebody has died but still has a serviceable organ, then that is maybe taken for somebody who needs that organ. But I think your question's kind of getting at. How is it that this individual does not have his subsistent form, but his tissues do have some kind of form of their own, such that they can still be serviceable for another patient?
Right. All issues about parts are complicated in this way. As a part, it's not the whole. It's part of the whole. It doesn't have the form of the whole. And oftentimes, without the part, the whole is lost, and so on. But every time you discuss this stuff, the part has some specifications of its own. The roof of that. specified differently from the basement. At least in my house it is. And therefore you need to distinguish between what's specific to the body and what it gets from belonging to the whole, which is its existence as a unit.
Ms. Tchaikovsky helpfully reminded me that students might not know the content of the Prima Pars like the back of their hands. So fair game includes the theology of the one God, the Trinity, the creation of the angels, as well as the creation of man. We've got another question back here.
Dr. Marshner, actually, what you were talking about at the end of your last response about how we need to be careful in distinguishing how parts are different from wholes is actually a good lean into what I wanted to ask, which is, I know you mentioned earlier that something that you found really well thought out in Cajetan is his commentary on how the soul relates to the body. And I was just curious if Cajetan said anything to maybe address an objection that someone could raise to the idea that the soul survives death, or that the person survives death, because if the only thing that survives death is the soul, and a soul is just a part of the whole person who's a body-soul composite, doesn't it seem like we could say that only a part of the person survives death and not the person himself? I'm just curious if Cajetan said anything to help answer that objection.
Oh, I think so. I think he would agree. What survives death is a part of the person. This is why we do not hold special services for souls not yet resurrected. This is why those not yet resurrected have something important to look forward to, after all. So yes, the person survives as a part of the person. And Cajetan will defend that answer voraciously, ferociously.
Yes. Sorry. I want to see if I can take the opportunity to ask you a question. I know many reasons why you would agree with many positions of Cajetan, and probably generally do agree with most of his. Are there any positions that you found yourself disagreeing with, or at least not being sure of?
Innumerable. Because he was writing in the context of Aristotelian science. That was what he thought science was. That was all he knew. And so repeatedly, he follows Aristotle into nonsense. Have you ever read the De Caelo? Aristotle fans? De Caelo? It is a wonderful pile of bunk. But I recommend it highly. Things in Aquinas with which you could disagree, because where Aquinas says something about the sun or the moon or the stars, in those places you will find things that I disagree with. Whereas Cajetan was uniformly faithful to Aquinas' sometimes wacky opinions.
Here's a question from Dr. Manning.
I have a pedestrian question. I feel like I was just driving by and saw the crowd, so I come in. And the question is simple and current. Now, we have a conflict today about what is social justice and what is the teaching of the church regarding very concrete issues from various members of the hierarchy. This is church teaching because I said it was. And I wonder what Cajetan might say about the distinction between the magisterial and the prudential regarding those opinions.
How many hours would you like? That is a big problem. He discusses what it takes for a theological opinion to be accepted. And he doesn't think that because a theologian says it, it should be accepted. Not because he knows about heretics. That has nothing to do with theologians. Oh well. Because he knew about what kind of support a proposition needed to be considered an articulation of the faith. And oftentimes, theological hypotheses, sensible enough, do not have such support. And I'm going to think of perhaps an example of that. My own prejudice is Our Lady's co-redeemership. Cajetan didn't like it one bit. Aquinas didn't like it. I don't like it. Partly because my mind is haunted by Protestant ghosts. Enough? Thank you.
Oh, lots of questions now. Why don't we go to one of Dr. Marshner's faithful amanuenses who helped to produce some of this, Mr. Fuller.
Hello, Dr. Marshner. My question, speaking about Protestant ghosts, was there something, a passage or part of Thomas's work that you found that you thought would be a good argument to give to a Protestant if they came with some of the more common objections, such as devotionals to Mary or the papacy or things of that nature? Did you have some in the commentary of Cajetan as well?
I found one where Aquinas deals with children. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm losing this. Where he's dealing with children. And the question is, the question is, can you merit justification? Can you merit to be justified? Can you merit the increase of grace? Yeah. Can you merit the initial grace? No. But if you get to heaven at the end of all your graces, and you say, I'm here on merit. And Aquinas' answer is yes. You can say that. What in the world is his ground for saying yes? Doesn't sound like St. Paul to me. Well, his ground for saying that is the parable of the husbandman who hired workers to come in and do his fields. And some came at 9 a.m. and some came at 11 and some came at midday and some came at noon and some came at night, so on. And he says, the Lord was correct to say, I'm fair to give you all the same. Because the worker deserves the hire for his work. You don't deserve heaven, but you deserve a reward for your work. And So my point is, to be rewarded for something is not the same as having earned it. And I thought that was, gee whiz, it's a good insight. To be rewarded for something is not the same as having earned it. Oh, Protestant friends?
We have time for perhaps one more, I think. See Mr. McGuire.
Well, obviously, thank you first for coming up. But I guess the question that I would like to ask is, do you prefer Plato or Aristotle?
Oh my goodness. To me, those two are like a midget and a giant. Plato was being a midget.